Hi everyone, we're with Caroline Strawson over in the UK. How are you doing, Caroline?
I'm really good, thank you. I'm looking out over blue skies here in the UK at the moment, so all is good.
I know that's rare growing up there. This day we're going to be talking about mainly about narcissistic abuse. It's a topic that I was particularly, I think, naive about it up until the last month or so, where I've been looking into it. I saw a masterclass with Caroline. That was with Marissa because we've both studied under her rapid transformational therapy technique, RTT. And there's a masterclass on there about narcissistic abuse. And I had a person in the community talk so much about what was happening to her, and it was really scary of what was happening and how bad it can get. So I had to ask Caroline to come on to explain more about her work and what people can do if they're in a situation like the ones that we'll talk about, because Caroline has a lot of solutions and is one of the best in the world at the moment in helping people out of these kinds of situations. So, Caroline, it's a pleasure to have you on. If you could give us an introduction to yourself and how you got into this work and why it's so important.
Absolutely. Hi, everybody. Thanks so much for asking me on the podcast, Steve. Really appreciate it. I'm always looking to get awareness out there about narcissistic abuse because it is really misunderstood and it's an overused term in our society today. So, I'm a rapid transformational therapist, just as you were saying, Steve. So, obviously, like yourself, trained under Marissa Peer. I'm also an EMDR practitioner. I'm a certified high performance coach and I have lots and lots of other qualifications behind me. I'm in the final part of my master's in positive psychology and coaching psychology. So I have a real interest in science. I have a medical background. And if you'd have said to me as a little girl, would I be what I am doing now? Of course, I would have said no. So I went into my original profession, which is in the medical profession. And then 10 years ago, I suppose it was a catalogue of events that led me then to be where I am today. So, literally within the space of about 18 months, Steve, my mum passed away very suddenly. My husband at the time walked out on me and my two children, leaving me in over £70,000 worth of debt culminating in April of 2013. Then I actually had my family home repossessed as well. So I literally lost everything. Now, at the time, then I was seeing a therapist because I knew things weren't right and I was desperately trying to obviously be there for my children. And I hope I was. But the other side of that was obviously I was really struggling to cope and I was diagnosed with post traumatic stress disorder. I now know it was actually complex PTSD that I had, but at the time, a lot of people have an umbrella of PTSD for CPTSD as well. I also was suffering with depression, anxiety, and self harm. And when I was actually talking to my therapist and talking about my marriage, she was just asking me questions. And as she was asking me these questions, she was saying, "You do know you've been abused. You do know this, don't you?" And I was saying, no, he just did this or he just said that. And I'm an intelligent woman, Steve. If you knew me before my marriage, I was ambitious. I was a confident, intelligent woman. But what I'd done was I'd found myself in a relationship with a narcissist. And slowly over time, my confidence had been whittled away. My sanity had been whittled away, all very cleverly and subtly. It doesn't happen overnight. It's an insidious form of psychological abuse. So there I was, this woman who was broken. Literally, I'd got no money. I'd put £10 petrol in my car because I didn't know whether I'd have any money after that. So I was literally living day to day, really. And my husband had moved 2 hours away. He was hardly seeing the children at all. And I used to start every day on my bathroom floor with my head in my hands, trying to avoid having a panic attack, which sometimes I was successful and sometimes I wasn't. And it was literally like I was walking in treacle. I didn't have any understanding about what was going on. And it was only when my therapist said to me, go and look up narcissist. And I did. And as I started to read about it on the internet, it was like light bulb after light bulb, Steve. And I was like, oh my goodness, this is my marriage. This is what's happened to me. And this started me really on then this journey of self discovery. Obviously, having a medical background, I'm very much science and evidence backed as well. So I'm a very spiritual person, but I'm very much what goes on in the brain? Why do I feel the way that I do? What can I do to change that? Because what I realized was, Steve, that I was actually perpetuating the abuse, even though we weren't married anymore. And there's a lot of physiological changes that happen in the brain when you've been in an abusive relationship. And this was something I didn't understand at the time, because people were almost saying to me, just ignore him, just forget about him now, just move on. And it's not like any other relationship. It isn't just a case of that. And this is why when I say, Steve, that this word it's overused in our society, because very much when people split up with people, there might be arguments, there might be a bit of conflict, and then they bandy this word around, oh, he or she is a narcissist. And narcissistic personality disorder is a mental health disorder. It's listed in the DSM, the Diagnostic Statistical Manual, which is what the American Psychological Association used to diagnose mental health disorders. And it's a personality disorder. It's formed in childhood. It's very rare you get a diagnosis, because by nature of a narcissist, it means they have to acknowledge that there is something wrong with them to go and get a diagnosis. So they reckon there's about 2.5% of the population that are narcissists. I think it is higher than that, but it's very difficult to actually have a diagnosis, which then makes it really hard. If you're saying your ex is a narcissist, for instance, or your mother or father, even, because this can happen obviously in families, is a narcissist, if you haven't necessarily got a formal diagnosis, you're only going by what that person is telling you. And of course, that then means it's her word against his. So who do you believe? And that makes it even harder. So over the years, I've developed my own way of, obviously, of myself with healing all of this, and all of this stuff that I started to work with my clients with about helping them heal and thrive after narcissistic abuse. I've put together my own really signature way of helping people heal, and hence obviously going and studying under Marissa Peer and doing rapid transformational therapy, because it's all obviously about subconscious beliefs. But also from a trauma perspective, anyone who's been in a narcissistic relationship has undergone trauma, and this is when things have changed within the brain. We move very much into our limbic system, our emotional part of the brain. Our hippocampus shrinks and our amygdala increases in size. So we're in a permanent state of fight, flight, freeze, or fawn, which is a fourth trauma response, which very much those who are in narcissistic relationships will probably find themselves either in a freeze or fawn response. So freeze, we know what that is. It's you go into yourself, you numb out, you dissociate. But fawn is also something, and we can call it Stockholm syndrome, trauma bonding, that kind of ilk. But it's where you're in that relationship and you make excuses for that person. You try and find reasons, and the reasons are never normally them, it's normally you. And this is what we call the fawn response. So it is a trauma response. So those who have been in a narcissistic relationship have these physiological changes. Every single one of my clients that I work with exhibit symptoms of complex PTSD. Obviously, I'm not a doctor, so I can't diagnose them with that. But from my perspective, every single one of them has got complex PTSD. So we're dealing with a host of issues here. So over the years, then I've developed and looked at what I felt people needed to really truly heal and thrive, because time doesn't heal narcissistic abuse. And in the last sort of 18 months now, I've written a best-selling book called Divorce Became My Superpower. And I've won, I think, 5 awards now in the last sort of 18 months for the work that I do with all of this as well. So I'm really passionate about educating people, helping people understand why they feel the way that they do, because very often they feel stuck, and giving them tools of how to move forward as well. And it's very solution focused. It's not talking therapy. Don't get me wrong, talking therapy has its place, but there's so much research out now that when we're dealing with trauma, talking therapy actually can make it worse, because it will just keep re-traumatizing you and keep you in a state of trauma response.
Yeah, thanks for that introduction. My first thoughts are around the labeling of this and the self-awareness.
Yeah.
On this podcast is really a podcast about self-awareness.
Yeah.
So in terms of labeling a narcissistic person, or labeling the relationship to be a narcissistic relationship, what do you find is easier? Because I'm imagining that it's quite difficult for some people to say to someone, oh, you're a narcissist, because it sounds like a straight insult and they're probably going to reject it. Yet if they say, okay, I think I'm in a narcissistic relationship and it's showing the signs of these traits, do you find that's an easier way for people to realize they're in a narcissistic relationship?
Yeah, so I get messages all the time saying my partner, my husband, my wife behaves like XYZ. Are they a narcissist? And again, it's very difficult to answer that question as a one off because if they're just telling me specific things of a moment, I can't make that judgment. But what I can say to that person is tell me how you feel. Tell me about what you're feeling in this relationship. So when they have said that to you, how does that make you feel? Because we can't argue with that because we know if I'm asking someone how you feel, they own that and they know how they feel. And there's something called narcissistic abuse syndrome. And this is where we talk about these sort of signs and symptoms that you are feeling. Are you questioning yourself all of the time? Maybe you feel like you're numbing out. Are you isolating yourself? Are you questioning yourself all of the time? When you're responding to something, maybe that your partner says to you, are they not listening to the words you are saying, but actually responding and reacting to how you are saying it? So things like you might say to them, who was that on the phone? And if they say, oh, it was just nobody, and then you say, who was it? And they say, oh, you've always been so sensitive about this. So they're not actually answering the question. They're making you question yourself because they're saying, oh, you're just being so sensitive. So you start to question yourself. Maybe I won't say anything then because he's going to or she's going to react like this. So it's very much about how you feel in that relationship. Is your gut saying that doesn't seem true, but you have your husband, your wife, your mum, or your dad looking at you, telling you something else? And we call this cognitive dissonance, where you have two completely conflicting views. And your brain wants to find the right view, and it's yet they're two conflicting views. So, for instance, I remember one time my ex-husband came home from a flight. He was cabin crew, and he said to me he'd killed somebody. And he told me this elaborate story about it, Steve. And my gut was saying, this doesn't sound right. Because A, I've got a medical background, and many years ago, I actually flew for the airline myself because I love traveling, and none of it made sense. But my husband was looking me in the eye and telling me this story. So, what was I to believe, my gut or my husband? So, I believed my husband in the end because I thought, surely you wouldn't lie about anything like that, surely. But my gut was telling me it wasn't right. So, you start to end up questioning yourself. You start to isolate, dissociate, just numb out from it. And I know certainly from my perspective, I was just existing in the end as well. When you actually get a diagnosis, though, if you want to look at it from a medical perspective, in the DSM, they list 9 traits of narcissistic personality disorder. And if you tick 5 of those or more, then you are what we call a narcissist. Okay. Now, it's almost like on a spectrum in a way, because you could have somebody that could tick all 9 boxes, or you could have somebody that ticks 5. Doesn't mean the effects for the victim aren't devastating. It just means they're on a spectrum. And there's also different types of narcissists as well, Steve. Many of your listeners maybe think of the archetypal narcissist from Narcissus, the Greek god, who would look at his reflection and I love myself, that kind of thing. Somebody walks into the room and they've walked into the room. They have this air of grandiosity. It's almost, look at me, I'm important. And yes, that can be obviously a narcissist. It can also equally be not, but also they can be traits of that. The most dangerous type of narcissist I find is what we call a covert narcissist. So somebody who walks into the room and has that air of grandiosity is an overt narcissist, overtly showing off almost. Now, the covert narcissist can be more difficult to spot. My ex was a covert narcissist, seemed like a really nice person to the outside world, almost victim like in themselves about how they were doing this and doing that, and almost trying to get approval from others by saying all of these things. I'm a great father, I'm a great husband, I'm a great this. And they can very much act like the victim. They're a lot more subtle. So you imagine if someone acts like that, and then you're feeling like that, and you think, no one's going to believe me. No one's going to believe me if I start to say that they say this to me or have made me feel like this, because they almost look like a pillar of the community. So it can be really devastating for somebody who is in that narcissistic relationship because they're questioning themselves. They've got physiological changes going on in their body. Their partner is behaving in a certain way where you think, no one's going to believe what I say anyway. So what do I do? Do I stay in the relationship? Do I go? And I always say there are 3 ways that people leave a narcissistic relationship. One, their partner finds a new narcissistic supply and they leave. 2, you just about manage that little bit of strength to crawl away from that relationship. And the third one is you commit suicide, you die in that relationship, either via suicide or you get so ill and have so much disease, because obviously the trauma response of stress leads to disease in the body, then obviously you may die earlier. And I get messages from people all of the time. I had a message from a lady the other day, Steve. Her son was 24 years old and he just committed suicide because he'd been in a narcissistic relationship. He'd had all of these changes and everything, these physiological changes. He was clearly suffering from CPTSD and just didn't know what to do because he just felt so bad about himself. And there are patterns to all of this as
It's incredibly scary.
yeah.
It makes me think about the whole education system, about relationships and
That.
intimacy. And then, we are vulnerable if
Yeah.
we end up meeting a covert or even an overt narcissist. And
Absolutely.
sounds like this young guy found something like that.
And there are always patterns to this as well, Steve. So anybody who ends up in a narcissistic relationship, it's not by coincidence. You find that anyone who ends up in a narcissistic relationship is a magnet to a narcissist. So you almost have two opposite ends of a spectrum. You have the narcissist on one hand and you have the codependent on the other. So everybody who ends up in a narcissistic relationship will have traits of codependency. So codependency is a lack of self. You have that lack of self-love, self-esteem, self-belief, self-respect. And when we are born, and you will know this from doing the rapid transformational therapy, and obviously I was doing hypnosis with that, between the ages of 2 years and 7 years old, we are in what we call a theta brainwave state. And this is the state where we are getting all of our subconscious beliefs. And these subconscious beliefs, so this programming that we have, come from our parents, our caregivers, and that they install that within us, that then becomes the blueprint for who we become as adults. Now, in our childhood, our parents and our caregivers, on the whole, they're doing the best that they can, or there can also be things like abuse and neglect and dysfunction in those families. Now, it's not these events that cause somebody to be a codependent and then end up in a narcissistic relationship. It's those events in your childhood with the meaning and interpretation you put on those events. And I'll give you an example here. So when I look back on my childhood, Steve, I look back on it with great memories. And it was only when I started to do my inner healing that I started to realize maybe there were some issues that I didn't know about. So my dad, as much as I love him, is very emotionally unavailable. And I know he loves me, but he's incapable of showing that. Okay. So when I was growing up, for instance, I was a big sports person and started very young. So let's say at 7 years old, I was doing bits of gymnastics in the lounge and my dad would be the judge. Okay. And my dad would look at me and go, ooh, 9.99 recurring. And he'd keep doing that. Now, although I'd say, oh, I'll do it again then, we can look back as an adult and think, oh, that's funny. Your dad was just trying to be funny by saying 9.99 recurring. But as that little girl, the meaning I attached to that event was, I'm not good enough. I'm not worthy. And then once we start to get these beliefs from other things that are happening and they start to lay that foundation in our subconscious mind, as we become a teenager and an adult, we are scanning the world to reinforce that all of the time. So my subconscious belief that was programmed into me as a child was, I'm not worthy and I'm not good enough. Consciously, I felt I was, but my subconscious wiring into my system was, I am not worthy, which made me a magnet to a narcissist, because both a codependent and a narcissist have a lack of self. However, the codependent recognizes that and is looking externally to get other people to behave in a certain way so they can feel worthy and good enough. A narcissist will sit there and look externally for other people to make them feel worthy and good enough by their actions. So as a codependent, I would be the one doing the actions to make myself feel good enough to the other person. The narcissist would want me to do the actions to prove to them that they are good enough too. But the narcissist will never recognize they have a problem, where the codependent will, because one of the biggest factors of a narcissist, Steve, is they have zero empathy, none. And that is one of the biggest things to remember. I remember one time being so poorly, sitting on my lounge floor, begging my husband not to go to work because I felt so ill and we'd got a new baby. And there was absolutely no emotion from him. It was almost like he was watching paint dry. There was no empathy. There was no nothing. And again, I didn't see that at the time. It was only when I came out of my marriage and obviously I could look back at certain events that I think, wow, these are massive red flags. And I just didn't realize because we'd got a house together, a home together, all of these things. And I didn't realize any of that at the time. Very much is all of the parameters of all of this. It's very difficult when you're in that relationship to recognize it because you've got all of these physiological changes. It's only when you start to come out and when you've got the legal process with people and everything else, it makes it incredibly difficult to heal. You've got to be intentional to heal from narcissistic abuse. Time does not heal narcissistic abuse.
Yeah, it's hard to know, like you were just saying, alluding to there, you don't even know it's happening.
No.
Is there any awareness we can give to people that it might be happening, or where is the line in abuse? Because I think in an average normal relationship, you're going to go through ups and downs building a relationship. We're going to go in the self-healing process. But you've mentioned that empathy is one of the key things. If that person has no empathy for your life or your healing process or some other things that you're going through in your life, then that's one major red flag.
Absolutely.
And
Yeah.
you have to learn. We talk a lot about self-love and boundaries a lot on the
Yeah.
podcast.
Definitely.
You have to
Boundaries
put
are key.
these boundaries.
Yeah. But what you will find though, Steve, is a codependent has not many boundaries because of that. Codependent is, of course, coming from a place of not feeling worthy. So that person who comes from a place of not feeling worthy doesn't want to put boundaries in because then if someone reacts to them in a certain way, then it's not the other person projecting onto them how they feel. That person will think, oh my goodness, they're behaving like this because I'm not worthy. It's a reflection on me. So this is why there are patterns to all of this. We can't heal the narcissist. We can't change that person. What we can do is look at what we need to do, how we can heal from that. And just as you mentioned earlier, Steve, for me, education is key. I have two children, a 15-year-old and an 11-year-old, and very much I educate them about healthy relationships, boundaries. If you feel something in your gut, listen to it, ask the questions. Because if you're in a respectful, healthy relationship, you still might not agree with the other person, but they will respect that and they will acknowledge that for you. So it's really key about helping people understand what a healthy relationship is. But a codependent will not end up in a healthy relationship anyway. And they are just magnets to a narcissist because, of course, the narcissist is going to keep taking and the codependent is going to keep giving. So really, for me, when I look back on my marriage and when it broke down and you go through a whole grieving cycle as well, I feel incredible gratitude to it now, which some of your listeners, if they're in a narcissistic relationship, will be thinking, I'll never feel gratitude about that. And I hear you and I get that. But where I am now, actually, all the narcissist did in my marriage was really shine a spotlight on all of my own inner wounds that were there anyway. They just really highlighted them. So for me not to keep repeating a cycle and end up in another narcissistic relationship, I needed to heal myself. It wasn't a case of looking externally, which is what all codependents do. If person A, B, C behaves in a nice way, then it must mean I'm worthy, so the world is good. We need to be able to be around people who are like that, knowing it is no reflection on us. They're just projecting onto us all of their own childhood experiences and past as well. So for me, it was about going within, healing my inner wound of not feeling worthy, reparenting myself, that inner child healing with all of that, upgrading my subconscious beliefs, which is obviously what I use the rapid transformational therapy for, because that really facilitates change. It's no good just going to talking therapy and consciously talking about, yes, I want to feel worthy. We have to change it and understand the root cause of that, like with RTT, and then really change it and wire that new belief in. And then the EMDR for me, which is eye movement desensitization and reprocessing, this is a somatic therapy. It's a trauma-based therapy because what I was finding was it's great upgrading those subconscious beliefs with people, but people were still getting triggered because what they got was trapped trauma in their body. So trauma is not just a mind experience. It's not just going on in our brain. It's held in our body. we have what's called somatic memory. And that somatic memory takes us back at any stage when we are triggered to a fight, flight, or freeze response. So many of my clients will be still in that freeze response very often. So if they get triggered, let's just say they see their ex and all of a sudden they freeze, they go into that dissociated state, and they might not want to see or speak to anyone for a few days, or just want telly or haul up because they've gone into a freeze trauma response. Because they haven't finished processing the trauma of being in that relationship, it immediately takes them back to being in that relationship. It moves from their rational, logical part of their brain in the prefrontal cortex to their emotional part in the limbic system. And what happens during trauma is the hippocampus can get a little bit skewed and doesn't timestamp these events that they are now in the past. So every time you have a trigger, it's like it's happening to you right now in the present moment. You're about to be eaten by that lion, so to speak, but you're not. You are safe. When you're out of that relationship, you're okay, but your body is still holding on to that trauma because it hasn't finished processing it. So complex PTSD is just an information processing disorder. So what we need to do, and this is what I do with the EMDR and various other modalities within this, is allow that person to finish processing that memory, releasing it from the body. So the hippocampus timestamps it, files it away, so you're able to think about these traumatic events without it eliciting that trauma response in the body of fight, flight, or freeze, or, neck tension, shoulder tension, crying, breathing really shallowly, which then obviously will move on to disease. I see many of my clients will be suffering with things like fibromyalgia. And I'm a big believer that many of these diseases that these people have is stress related from trauma. So it's about releasing it from the body. So it's not just a case of breaking up from a argumentative relationship. There are so many dynamics to this, but you can come out the other side. But it takes intention, it takes time, and it takes using the right methods to do this.
Yeah, thank you for sharing all of that again. Before we move on to some of these solutions, just finally adding in some things because I want to be wary of the dangers of this
Yeah.
for people that are listening to this, or maybe they know a friend or family member who
Yeah.
seems to be in a
Mhm.
dangerous situation. I know
Yeah.
there's the dangers of taking your own life is
Correct.
there, and also I heard you mention on the masterclass with Marissa Peer about the difficulties of leaving a relationship just because these people can attack or even murder.
Correct. And most domestic abuse murders will happen when you leave the relationship within the first 2 weeks, and they're the stats. So, priority, if you're listening and you're in that relationship, priority is your safety. I volunteer at my local domestic abuse charity. We know a lot about the stats, and I know how incredibly difficult it is to leave a relationship like this, particularly when there could also be financial abuse at play. So you might not have any money, you've got children together, and of course, they might be throwing threats at you and you feel really scared. So, first priority is safety. You need to ensure that you are safe. So, what I would suggest to people if they're in that relationship right now is start photocopying bank statements. Just in the background, start to photocopy and get a little file and put it away where nobody is going to find it. And whether that means set up a separate email address and send it to your friend or whoever that is, but just photocopy everything that you can. Because remember, that moment you leave, you may be cut off to all of that and you won't have access to it. So make sure you are well prepared. I would also, if you can, start to maybe save a little bit of a squirrel fund that you've maybe got a little bit of a buffer if money does get cut off. Obviously, wherever you are in the world, there will potentially be help out there with women's refuges. And also, there are male refuges out there now. So, there is help for men in all of this too. But it tends to be obviously the men are a lot the ones that are already in work, and the women may potentially be at home. I know that's a big generalization, but it's normally the case of what happens. So, either or, just make sure that you have created and photocopied as much as you possibly can. The other thing is, if you think you are in a relationship like this, and you just go and watch YouTube channels. Obviously, you can follow me on Instagram or Facebook. I've got a YouTube channel. Just slowly start to educate yourself on all of this, okay? Just so that you start to know you're not going crazy. I have a Facebook group as well. We're a big community of people. So you know you're not on your own, because one of the biggest things, Steve, is people think they're not going to be believed. And so they don't say anything. And I'm here to say, I believe you. I know what it's like. I've been where you are. I understand. And I think just having somebody who gets it with my clients, the number of times they say, you really get it. It's like you're in my head. It's because I have been there. I've been exactly where you are. And I know how difficult it is. So make sure that you are safe as a priority. And that may mean seeking legal advice. It may mean seeking out your local domestic abuse charities, obviously reaching out to people like myself online. So you're just building up some resilience for when obviously you want to leave that relationship as well. And obviously, be aware that when you leave does not mean the abuse will stop. Sometimes it can get even worse. So I advise people to make sure you have what I call a breakup ecosystem around yourself. So, friends, family, a legal team, maybe a financial advisor, an exercise buddy, because exercise is really important just to keep processing all of this as well, and also a therapist or coach like myself. So you've created a team of people around yourself whilst you're going to go through this, because the first 12 months will be like riding a very fast up and down roller coaster. And I think if you are aware of that and you've surrounded yourself with people, it's a case of just getting through that. But there are things you can do along the way as well, particularly if you're working with a coach or therapist like myself, because we need to start to unravel and understand. Now, the other thing I know you said, Steve, was what if you think a friend or family member is in a narcissistic relationship? What do you do then? This is a really difficult one, because you can't make somebody recognize or somebody leave a relationship if they don't feel that there is anything wrong or they don't recognize that. However much you know that they are losing themselves and you can see they're becoming a shadow of themselves, all you need to do is let them know that you are always there. Don't try and make them feel even worse by saying he shouldn't be doing this or she shouldn't be doing that, because that will make them feel even more unworthy than they already feel anyway. So it's a case of you just being there. Maybe saying, listen, I watched this video the other day on YouTube and I thought, and it just rang true a bit. Maybe watch it when you have a moment. So you're not being really like, you should leave, you should do this. Don't let them treat you like this. Because remember, when you are in that relationship, it is very different. You've had brain changes that are going on, and someone saying these things to you, however well meaning and intentionally well meaning they are, is going to make that person feel worse. Just let them know that you are there. Check in on them regularly. Make sure that they know that, you're not sick of them going over the same thing over and over again. Again, I spoke at a domestic abuse symposium last week, and we were talking again about stats. And I think it was something frightening that before anybody reports anything, there will have been, I think, 200 incidences at home. And before someone will even leave a relationship, it will take 7 times of reporting it to the authority before they will leave. They will just go and then come back again, go and come back. Again, because of the trauma responses, the physiological changes in the brain coming from a place of not being worthy and thinking, I must go back to that relationship, because if you come out of it, you feel even more worthless. So there are so many parameters to this.
Yeah, and then for friends or family and things like that, and even for people in it themselves, where's the balance between thinking yourself as a victim and also empowerment? Do you need to think of yourself as like an empowered victim and you're going to move out of this, or
The victim in a narcissistic relationship will not be in a state of mind to ever think about empowerment at that stage, because there will have been so many changes. And this is why the pattern is a codependent with a narcissist. I was a codependent. My 2 sisters, I have 2 older sisters, they are both not codependents, yet we grew up with the same parents. But it was very different dynamics because, again, I was the youngest. I was at home a lot on my own. I could see the effect on my mum from my dad. My mum was a codependent. My dad isn't a narcissist, but he was emotionally unavailable. So the meaning I attached to these events was, when my dad wasn't praising me or telling me I love you or I'm proud of you, was I'm not good enough. The factor that then when you find yourself in a relationship with a narcissist, I was never ever thinking, oh, I'm going to be empowered or anything. If my sister, say, had started dating my ex-husband, within a month or two, they would have ended the relationship. They just wouldn't have stayed in it. But me as a codependent, I'd go, I'll keep trying. I'll keep showing you. I'll try and make it right. Maybe I'll do this. Maybe I'll do that. Oh, maybe he's just tired and that's why he said that. Maybe he didn't mean it like that. You start to make excuses all of the time. And this just whittles away at your confidence, your self-esteem. Because remember, a codependent has a lack of self. You're always looking externally for others to behave in a certain way so you feel that sense of worth. So if you're with somebody who is saying all of these things to you, you don't, as a codependent, think, oh, I'm going to leave because you've got a healthy sense of self. You think, oh my goodness, they're saying all of that because I'm not worthy. I must try harder. I must do this. So you will never think about being empowered when you're in that because you're not in that state of mind. All you're thinking about, I know certainly for me, when I came out of my marriage, I felt guilt, I felt shame, I felt I was now a single mum, my kids were from a broken home. I was beating myself up with all of this shame and this guilt. It wasn't the fact actually that, thank God, I'm out of that relationship. It was actually still that sense of not feeling good enough, not feeling worthy as a wife, as a mother, as a daughter, all of these things. That's what I was focusing on because I had a great big hole in my soul of this complete lack of self.
Now, yeah, I think this is the appropriate time of like asking the healing process more. First, how did you go on that journey of getting that sense of self again?
Yeah, it was really difficult because when you come out of that relationship, again, there's a part of your brain called the hypothalamus that secretes these neuropeptides. So I was addicted to the narcissist. So all of those feelings of being in that fight, flight, or freeze, I was addicted to feeling like that. And it's what I knew. It was like I was addicted to the struggle. So I was waiting for these messages to come through. I was waiting to have a conversation so I could go back in almost to that trauma response because that's what I knew. So I was addicted to feeling like that. One of the biggest ways to heal is, and this is the starting point in every single person I work with, and that is no contact or extreme modified contact if you have children. You have to set yourself those boundaries where you are creating the ideal atmosphere for you to start to heal. And if you're still in contact with them and you're still back and forth emailing, messaging, phone calls, you will not heal. You can't physically heal because you're still going to remain in that addictive state. You have to break that cycle. And it is really hard because it's like an addict. And they say that it's 20 times more difficult to break the addiction of a narcissist than it is of heroin.
My God.
So it's, again, it's not just a case of the narcissist, right, ignore them, block them, everything else. Every cell of your body wants to communicate with them, wants to message with them, because it's what your cells are craving for at that time. So you have to create an ideal environment to start off with for even the healing process to start. And that is no contact or extreme modified contact when you have children. Because I've had obviously children with my ex-husband. So I had to create, and it took me 2 years to get to this stage. So a long time. And then the moment I created that, it was very difficult, but it was the moment then I could actually start to focus on my own self-healing then.
Yeah, I didn't know. I think you may have mentioned that stat before on the masterclass, but hearing it again, still absolutely shocking of like how
It is.
difficult it is to get past these brain chemicals.
Yeah, it is. It takes time and it takes intention. And the key here is intention. And when you're feeling exhausted and tired, that sometimes feels like the last thing on your mind to do. But it's little steps. Little steps lead to giant leaps. So it's just one day at a time, little steps. What can you do? But intentionally healing. Like I say, time does not heal narcissistic abuse. Because ultimately, if you just come out of that relationship with a narcissist, and then just expect time to heal, it doesn't heal your codependency. So you're again going to still potentially have those same cycles of relationships with other people. You have to go within. You have to heal your deep inner wounds so that then when you go out and get a new relationship, you're coming from a place of a healthy sense of self.
So yeah, going into your process of healing with a client, what does that look like? Because I know you work with the subconscious mind with the RTT, which you
Right.
can talk a little bit about, but then I'd love to know more about how you deal with the PTSD and the complex PTSD, like within the body, because I know it's a brain body connection.
Right.
I'm interested to
Absolutely.
hear about that as well.
Yeah, so it's a very holistic approach, and I've created really my own unique healing method of lots of different modalities, which I call neurofreedom healing. So it's about everything in your brain, but your nervous system. So when we are reacting to things, so when we're feeling that anxiety, when we're feeling that the shallow breathing, the tension, the jaw clenching, fist clenching, picking of your skin, all of these things, these are all trauma responses that are being held in the body, and it's your nervous system that is reacting to that. So, what I do is I look at obviously subconscious beliefs. So, the starting point. Why do you feel you are not worthy? Why don't you feel you are good enough? Was there major trauma in your childhood? Which there can be. I've dealt with many clients where there's been abuse in their childhood, but equally, it doesn't have to be abuse. I wasn't abused as a child, but the meaning I attached to events of what my parents behaved led me then to still believe I wasn't worthy or good enough. So we can have massive trauma. And I think this is the misconception of society today of what we think trauma is, because a lot of people think trauma are these major events, which of course they are. But equally, it can just be neglect, dysfunctional families, just meaning you've attached to different things. This can elicit traumatic responses within our body. So it doesn't just have to be that. So when I work with my clients, I look at obviously those subconscious beliefs. And again, this is when I use RTT. So, rapid transformational therapy. So, we use it as a form of hypnosis to go back to where those scenes were in normally childhood that you've attached certain meanings to. And we find out why. And we obviously upgrade that inner child. We upgrade those subconscious beliefs. I do a lot of reparenting techniques as well with this. So, taking people back almost like they are now the loving parent to their little boy or little girl that's within them, because very often, of course, we're adult bodies with a wounded inner child. So I do a lot of reparenting techniques, and I have 4 pillars of reparenting that I talk to my clients about, going back and literally going back to basics of almost you are now the parent to that little child, and going back and doing those things that maybe weren't done when you were a child. And it's going back and relayering over that as well. So I do a lot of that. So we obviously know then that trauma is stored in the body. We call this somatic memory, and this can come from babies all the way up, which is sometimes some people just walk into a room and they get this feeling in their body and they don't know why. And this is what we call somatic memory, because you've had a trigger about something. So normally you can have an image of a trigger, but sometimes you don't even have an image. You just feel it in your body. So EMDR, so this eye movement desensitization and reprocessing, it's a form of bilateral stimulation, and it's probably one of the most widely recognized treatments now for trauma, for PTSD and complex PTSD. And what it does is it uses bilateral stimulation. It doesn't have to be eyes. It can be butterfly tapping. It can be, I have some TheraTappers as well, where I use vibrations in each hand or through sound. And it's basically using parts of the brain, your left and right hand side of the brain, to really timestamp memories, traumatic memories, into the past. So rather than then having these triggers of fight, flight, or freeze responses in a moment, what you're able to do then is think of these traumatic memories without that trauma response, without your nervous system going into dysregulation. So when I do EMDR, it's an 8-step protocol, and a lot of this is about resourcing my clients. So I need to be able to know my clients are able to sit in their most traumatic event, really dysregulating and charging up their nervous system, but able to have tools to self-regulate. So I use a number of methods to give to my clients, using various methods, so that when they are feeling charged, when they're feeling activated and they're into that emotional part of their brain, which isn't rational or logical, I've given them tools to get back into that prefrontal cortex. So I often talk with my clients about online and offline. So when you're online, you're in the present, you know you are safe, you know you are okay. When you get a trigger, we go into that emotional part of our brain, our limbic system, which sets off, our nervous system takes over, our autonomic nervous system. And whether that goes into our parasympathetic or sympathetic, depending on whether we're going to go into fight, flight, or freeze. And I talk a lot with my clients as well. There's a theory called the polyvagal theory. We have a nerve down the back of our neck called the vagus nerve. So I will also do things like vagus nerve toning as well, which is really important to help within the trauma field. And again, these are all cutting edge, really research based things really coming through now as well about helping people through the trauma with this. So this is a lot of somatic therapy then about processing trauma through your body. So giving people tools to recognize you are in the present moment. Because when we have a trauma response, it's taking us back to a scene or an event or a traumatic time in our life. But actually, we're in the present now and we're safe now. And it's just got stuck. So we need to process that through the body then as well. I also do a lot of journaling, but not just regular journaling about your everyday life. I do what's called your intentional future self journaling. Because again, we know the brain doesn't know whether things have happened or not, or right or wrong. It just does what you tell it. So, by nature of doing your future intentional self journaling, we're creating who you want to be by writing it down. And by nature of doing that means you move towards being that person as well. I do ego work. So, again, the ego, often we think that is negative, but it's normally there to protect you. It's our false sense of self. With that, we look at codependency. So there's a whole range within there that I use to really look at subconscious beliefs, clearing the trauma, practical strategies of how to cope as well. And then from a sort of high performance level, it's really, and positive psychology, it's okay then. How do you go and live your best life now? What do we focus on? So there's 6 pillars of happiness that I focus on, which is all backed by science with positive psychology, our PERMA profile. So positive emotion, engagement, relationships, meaning, achievement, and health. So we do a profile of that, of the person, and I get them to do this regularly to see where they are. So it's really about going back to childhood, really upgrading those beliefs, clearing all of that trauma that is stored in the body, understanding. I do a lot of psychoeducation as well, why people feel the way they do. And then for moving forward, how do we now go and live our best life? How do we do that? Because so many people can't imagine a life not feeling the way that they do. And it can be really strange for them to think of a life feeling free of trauma, a life feeling free of doing whatever you want to do. And that's really alien to people at the start. So it's just really a process that I work through with my clients to get them to the stage where they can then go off and go and live their best life because they're in the driving seat of that.
Wow, it sounds incredibly researched and put together. Yeah, I haven't even heard of the EMDR and the, was it vagal?
Yeah, so it's the vagus nerve runs down the back of our neck,
Yeah,
and there's
part of the vagus nerve. Just
so polyvagal theory. It's absolutely fascinating and very much related to trauma. We've got the ventral and dorsal part of our vagus nerve where we get the response. Is because again, as human beings, we're so socialized now that actually from a trauma perspective, that can really stunt us, because an animal going through trauma in the wild will just process it naturally and automatically. But very much as human beings now, we think, oh, if we're shaking from trauma, we should stop shaking. Don't cry. We shouldn't cry. So we stop ourselves from actually processing the trauma and it becomes stuck. The animals in the wild, you don't see an animal in the wild with PTSD or complex PTSD. You might in captivity, but you wouldn't in the wild because they just do what comes natural and process it. And it's really about, again, what I teach my clients is really embracing what you feel in your body. Anxiety, a lot of people think anxiety is negative, but very often anxiety is there as a protection mechanism. It's like a shield for something because, again, your brain's number one job is survival, just to keep you safe. So if we're creating these things in our body, like anxiety, because again, you weren't born like that. If we're creating that, it's because your brain believes that keeping you in that anxiety state is less painful than something else. But when we look at what that something else is, normally that something else from being a child is, yeah, you can understand that, but you're an adult now. So it's really getting to understand all of that. Do you need that in your life now? Is it serving you now?
yeah, most of the animal stuff that you were talking about there, I know I've read the book by Peter Levine, Waking the
Yeah.
Tiger, and I do recommend that one.
Great book.
Yeah, it explains pretty much what you were saying there about the shaking. So shaking is something we recommend on our online course, but as well as aspecting. I don't know if you use that one at all. Aspecting with members of your past to release the trauma. And then we have 7 tools of shaking, hand screaming, and a few others that help to process the emotions when you're going through the aspecting process.
I think you'd find really interesting then, Steve, looking and reading around the polyvagal theory, because when you're saying about screaming and that
Yeah.
vagus nerve toning is things like humming, gargling, really toning that nerve, strengthening it up. Because if you've been through trauma, we need to strengthen that, just like going to the gym almost. You need to strengthen all of those things that are going to really carry you through.
Yeah. Yeah. And these things are way more put into depth into what you do with your work. You must have an overload of clients, I imagine. I remember you saying what was the percentage of narcissists that are out there?
They reckon 2.5%, but I think it's more than that because that's only what we know and what people say. It's definitely more than that.
Yeah, I think even 2.5% of what America, there's, I don't know, 400 million. Then
Exactly.
you're looking at 8 million narcissists.
Correct. Yeah. And it worse, I think, because we have things like social media now and everything like that, it just brings everything even more to the forefront. Because again, remember, a narcissist is an empty soul. So they're always going to look at tools and strategies for them to feel this grandiosity that they need to feel. It's like a supply. Their drug of choice is other people making them feel good. So if you're making them feel good at the time, great, you're in, it'll be fine as such. But the moment when you're questioning things or you're not doing what they want or anything like that, and you're not giving them that supply, they will seek it elsewhere or they will really turn on you as well.
From a sociological impact, people are in high echelons of politics are often seen as narcissists. Like, it's
Ah,
quite a grand
mm,
sociological problem that really is only solved through education and healing, such as the things that
absolutely.
you're talking about. And then perhaps the narcissists may begin to realize when there's an overwhelming
Correct.
sense of information that they may go on a healing process themselves.
Yeah, there's no research out there right now of a narcissist ever healing. Now, people, again, the up to date research is narcissists aren't born. There's no genetic link as such to having narcissistic personality disorder. They are formed within childhood. And they're normally formed by parents who either treat their child like a golden child. So, again, they are showering this level of grandiosity onto a child. Equally, it can come from neglect and dysfunction as well. A child who doesn't have any love and will start to then seek out when they get older that other people must give them all of that too. And the other thing is maybe a lot of sibling rivalry. They're really played off against other siblings. And this is when obviously the potential is that narcissistic personality disorder is formed. But to this day, there is nobody having been cured from narcissistic personality disorder. There's nobody. And anyone who says there are, I want to see the research about it because I've had many debates about this where I had a debate with someone the other day that they said, no, we're working with people and they are recovering, but it was people in the prison service. And again, I know narcissists are very conniving and they will say what you want to hear. And I guarantee it pretty much when we look at the evidence and those who are in the field of narcissistic abuse, there is no scientific evidence right now that anybody has had narcissistic personality disorder and then not had it. Once they've got it, they've got it. And by nature of it, because they don't think they have an issue anyway, they will either play the game and pretend to have therapy for whatever reason to gain what they want, or they just won't acknowledge it and because they see it as everybody else's problem. You did this, not me.
Yeah, which means, as you say, it's not nature, it's nurture. Therefore, we have to have an education system where parents that have the knowledge that they're not going to bring up a narcissist, but I guess things are going to slip through the net. We're trying to create a utopian world here.
Right, absolutely. And you tend to find if you have a codependent and a narcissist, you will have children who are either codependents or narcissists too. So the beauty of it is if you obviously separate from a narcissist, you're still going to have one narcissistic parent. But if you heal your codependency, your children can grow up and break that cycle. My two children now have such a healthy sense of self. They know more than I did up until in my 30s. They really do. They are great. They would never get into a narcissistic relationship ever. And not because I talk to them necessarily about narcissists, because I don't. But what I talk to them about is a healthy sense of self, filling them up that just simply for breathing, they are good enough. So if they get 10 out of 10 in an exam, for instance, I don't say, well done, you've got 10 out of 10, because that can become conditional love. What I say is, well done. I know how hard you tried to get that result. So it's all about reinforcing that self all of the time, not results, not this, not that, because we don't want our children to think our love is conditional, because it shouldn't be. It should be unconditional, simply being for who they are, because they are worthy and they are good enough simply for being alive. And that's what we need our children to understand.
Yeah, I think it's a good note to end on. I know we could go on for another hour or 2 hours, but I know
Yeah.
you've got a lot of great content out there, and I don't want to overwhelm people just in this hour. Yeah, where is the best place people can find all of your great work?
So I have a YouTube channel just under my name, Caroline Strawson, an Instagram account, again, Caroline Strawson. I have my Facebook business page, which again, easy to find, Caroline Strawson. So, I have lots of content out there. I also have a free group on Facebook called Divorce and Breakup Support After Narcissistic Abuse and Codependency. So you can find the link either on my personal page, you'll find the link, or again, just search for Divorce and Breakup Support After Narcissistic Abuse. And also my website as well. People can go and have a read a bit more about my background, my story, and everything else as well. And again, my book, Divorce Became My Superpower, is on Amazon. I just did a video yesterday actually on YouTube. I read a section of a chapter just about gaslighting because my ex-husband came home from work one day and said to me, I think I've killed somebody. So go and have a listen to that, because if you want to know what gaslighting is, then that is in its absolute true format there.
Beautiful. Yeah, I think that all of this work is and education is so much needed out there. I think I've built over the last 6 or 7 years some form of this education, but it always keeps on widening. And even in your research, I know that's going to keep growing. And I know your work is badly needed here. So thank you for following your path and keep going with it, because it's really important. Probably
Thank
some of
you.
the most important work on this planet right now. So
Thank you. Well, I really appreciate it. And thank you for everyone for listening. And remember, don't be alone. I believe you, and it can get better.
yeah, indeed. Stick in there, and definitely reach out to Caroline if you're in one of these situations. I wholeheartedly recommend doing that. So
Thanks so much, Steve.
thank you, Caroline.